You can see my presentation, right? Cristina and yes, okay. So I'm gonna start by telling you a little bit about the background of this research, the motivation and how I chose this theme. I don't know how I can change the, okay. So last year I had some themes on my mind regarding school leadership and school management. I wanted to do a research about this theme here in Brazil. So I went to the Department of Education here in São Paulo and I discussed with them some of the themes that I had in mind, some of the topics, and they told me during the conversation, it was January 2019, that 19 new principals had just been nominated to begin their job. And so that caught my attention. I was really intrigued by that information. And I wanted to understand a little bit more, how is this transition from the classroom to a management role? And I was lucky enough because when I chose the theme, it was only 19 principals, but throughout the months, 200 new principals were nominated in 2019. So it was very interesting because we had a lot of cases. And when I decided to study that, I had only 19 cases, but then we had 215 cases. So this research specifically aims to understand the challenges faced by beginning principals during their first year. Internationally, this is a very developed field. It has a lot of researches about that. But in Brazil, it had never been done any research about that. So this is the first research about beginning principles in Brazil using this methodology. So this research had three main objectives. The first one was to understand the socialization process of beginning principals in São Paulo. The second objective was to understand the support given by the public administration to these principals, how they are supported by the municipal department or the Ministry of Education. So how the public administration deals with this transition. And what are the main formative necessities that they are facing in this transition. And as I said in the beginning, this research was developed with the support of the municipal Department of Education here in São Paulo, and also the Principals Union. So these two organizations were very important during the process of this research. They disseminated the research to all the principals, and they were very important during all the process. And in the end of the year, in November 2019, I presented the results, the preliminary results of this research to them, and we had the opportunity to discuss the main findings and see what could change in the Department of Education. So it was a very interesting process. So I'll start by telling you some of the findings of the literature review. So just contextualizing the field, principals are the second most important inter-school factor for student performance. So they should be highlighted, they should be studied, they should be in the governmental agenda because they have a very important impact. The first studies regarding principals started in 1970s with the studies done by Greenfield. And the beginning principles started to be analyzed at the end of the 1980s and beginning of the 1990s. and especially in Anglo-Saxon countries. And these studies showed that the first 2 years are the most important in a principal's career. So these first 2 years should be studied, should be analyzed, and should be highlighted. They deserve that because it's a very important moment in a principal's career. In the last 20 years, the studies have been replicated to non-Anglo-Saxon countries, broadening the debate. They are bringing new conclusions to the debate. And some studies have been done in China, Thailand, Spain, Turkey, and some countries and some African countries also. So we are broadening the debate. As I said in the last slide, in Brazil, there's no study regarding beginning principles. So what is interesting to note when we look at all these studies is that the studies regarding beginning principles have all encountered similar problems. So all around the world, the problems are more or less the same. Principals are facing the same questions in all the countries that have been analyzed. So some of the problems are described as traumatic experience. The principals say that they have little anticipation of problems. They have to deal with multiple demands. They feel lonely and isolated. They have to deal with the legacy of the previous director, and they have to deal with a pre-established culture. They have to deal with difficulties regarding time management and the volume and diversity of tasks. And they also have to deal with very resistant and sometimes inefficient teams. The studies that were done were developed in non-Anglo-Saxon countries. They brought some new findings to the field. They validated all these problems that were listed in Anglo-Saxon countries, but they brought new findings, such as the conflict resolution between students and teachers, the shortage of staff, dealing with the lack of resources, and so on. And what is very interesting to note is that despite the fact that between all these countries, among all these countries, we are facing similar problems, the solutions are very different. This is what differentiates the countries. The strategies are different to deal with this transition. So it's known that beginning principles need support strategies. And the way that this transition is done is going to guarantee a reduction or an expansion of the problems. So it's very important that the countries look at that and that they try to implement strategies to reduce these problems. Most of the countries still do not have formal training programs. Many of them are trying to insert this theme in the agenda, but some countries do have very successful programs, especially in Anglo-Saxon countries such as Australia, Canada, New Zealand, for example. And in Victoria, in Australia, they have a program called Evolve, for example. This is just one example. It's an 8-month program where the principals can count on workshops, mentoring, and self-directed learning, for example. So it's a long period.
Sorry, just to clarify, is that a program after the principals have been appointed, or is that pre-appointment training?
I'm not sure.
Inicial
They were nominated.
Okay, but they're nominated but not serving as principals.
Yeah,
okay.
Yeah. That's what I think, but I have to check, double check. So the methodology of this study was done like that. We used some of the instruments developed by 4 researchers from Universidade Diego Portales, coordinated by José Weinstein. And so we translated the instruments to Portuguese and then adapted them to the Brazilian context. And with these instruments, we did 3 case studies, and we applied, we sent the questionnaire to 215 new principals here in São Paulo. And we had a rate of return, I don't know, the answering rate of 76 answers. So for me, I thought it was low, a low rate, but the Department of Education and the Principals Union said it was very successful because principals never engage with questionnaires, so they thought it's a good rate. Actually, I don't know because I don't know how to compare that, but I'm just sharing what they thought about the results. And so the next phase was to compare the results that we saw in the case studies and the answers that we had from the questionnaires. And here I'm going to present some of the results that we found in this analysis. I'm gonna just talk a little bit about the case selection first. So we selected 3 cases using also the same criteria used in Chile. So we had 4 criteria. The first criteria was that the principals didn't have any previous experience in management roles. And we also used 3 other criteria. So location, gender, and school results. So we came to these 3 cases here, 1 male and 2 females, primary, secondary education, and early childhood. The IDEP is the index for school results, and it goes from 1 to 6. So here we chose 1 school that is lower index and 1 school that is a higher index, and schools from different regions here in São Paulo. So these were the criteria for the case selection. Regarding the context, I thought it was interesting to tell you a little bit about how the principals are selected and nominated here in São Paulo and comparing it to Brazil. So in Brazil, 96% of principals selection are made through appointment. Mainly political appointment, but some of them are also election. So they are elected by the community, the school community. Only 4% of the municipalities do what is called a concurso público, a public tender. And in São Paulo, where I did the study, the last concurso was in 2015. So, but it's interesting that the municipality can use the candidates that were approved and nominate them even after 3 or 4 years. So this is what happened. The concurso was in 2015, and they did not do new concursos or new public tenders. So there were like 9 nominations after the concurso in 2015. And in 2019, 215 new principals were nominated. So this is exactly what I told you in the beginning. When I decided to do this research in January of 2019, we had just 19 new principals, and until June, 215 of them were nominated. So this is like our sample. So going to the results. The first thing is regards the representation of like regional representation. So in São Paulo, we have the Department of the Municipal Department of Education, and we have the schools, and between them we have a regional department. called DRE, Diretoria Regional de Ensino. So we had respondents from all 13 regional departments. So we covered all the regional departments in this research. Regarding previous experience, it's interesting to note that 34% of the principals did not have any previous experience in management roles, but 66% of them had previous experience, especially as principal's assistant. So it's interesting to see that 1 in 3 did not have any experience at all. And it's also interesting to note that this is not a criteria in the concurso. The criteria for the concurso are 2. You have to have an undergraduate degree in pedagogy or a graduate degree in education. And you have to have 3 years of teaching experience. So they don't say anything about previous experience as a principal, but 66% of them had some kind of experience in management roles, maybe as a pedagogical coordinator, but sometimes as a principal's assistant or a principal substitute or deputy principal.
May I ask a question?
Yes.
Are these principles coming from the system or outside the system?
It's from the system. I don't know how to say that in English. It's called concurso de acesso. So you have to access this only if you are a teacher in this system, in this public system. It's seen as a career move, but you cannot, even if you're a teacher in another municipality or another state, you cannot enter the system. So we asked them about education and training, and among principals with previous experience, almost half of them had specialization in school management or school leadership. And among principals without experience, a lower percentage of them had done such specialization courses, which is very interesting because they don't have experience and they have a lower percentage of them doing specialization courses. When I asked about specialization courses, these are mainly paid courses that they chose to do during their career. Sometimes they got some scholarships to do that, but they are mainly paid specialization courses. And after the nomination, 44% of them said that they took training courses. The majority of them did the course offered by the Principals Union. So the Principals Union has a very important role here because they are offering a formal training for the principals, for the beginning principals. And what's also interesting to see is that there is no formal training offered by the Municipal Department of Education at all. There's nothing, not even a workshop, not even informal conversation, nothing. But the regional departments, some of them offer a training. But here we can see like a very heterogeneous situation. Just 4 out of 13 regional departments offer some training, and the trainings are very different between them. So sometimes it's just like an informal conversation. Sometimes it's like 4 weeks, a 4-week training. Sometimes it's a more, specific course on technical systems and things like that. So it's very heterogeneous among the regional departments and among the experiences between the principals. So this is something that really caught our attention because they are having very different experiences regarding training. Almost 60% of them declared not being prepared at all or weakly prepared to do this management role. And 42% declared feeling adequately or well prepared. And most of them said that because they had previous experience in management roles. So this is very interesting. The previous experience gave them this feeling that they are adequately or well prepared to do this role. 40% of them approximately had taken specialization courses, and 64 hadn't taken any training after being nominated. So they chose not to do that, probably because they have this impression that they are well prepared for the role. And something that is interesting also is the gender bias. So 28.5% of the people who said that they were adequately or well prepared for the role are male, compared to 20% of male in the total sample. So maybe there is something related to gender also. Regarding the influences, so what made you decide to become a principal? So the majority of them said that they tested their abilities in other positions, and this was the natural path to follow. So the previous experience, again, here appears as something very important for them. And some of them said that there was a suggestion from another principal or a boss, a former boss or something like that. In the case studies, something that we validated when we compared these questionnaire results with the case studies was the influence done by other principals. So when these principals were teachers, the influence done by principals was very important. So they declared that this was very important for them in a positive or in a negative way. So one of them said that 2 principals had deeply disappointed me, so they inspired me to do things differently. There wasn't someone in special, but a composition of many principals. So I remember the ones that had a human perspective and were able to create a good school climate. When we look at the motivation, so what motivated you to become a principal? The majority of them said that they wanted to make a contribution to the public education. And then the second answer was that it was a challenge, a professional challenge. And again, when we compare these results with the case studies results, it's interesting to note that we validate part of the answers. So looking at the case studies, actually salary was a very important point when deciding to become a principal, because when they were teachers, they had like 2 or 3 jobs as teachers. And so becoming a principal was a career decision or a life choice or a lifestyle choice, because they wanted to have just one job. So salary was important in this sense. So I wanted to have just one job. I didn't want to have like 2 or 3 jobs. They sometimes, and they said that they didn't even know exactly what they were going to do, or they didn't even think very much about the activities or the abilities or competences for this role, but they wanted to have a different life. They wanted to continue working in education with a different role, with a different lifestyle, better saying. So in a way, we don't validate what we see in the questionnaires. here, but we validate another thing. So when they say here that it's a professional challenge, we validate here when one of the principals said that I wanted to know the whole school. In the classroom, we stay very isolated. So she clearly said that she wanted to interact with other actors. She wanted to have like, she wanted to circulate in the whole school and not stay just isolated in the classroom. That's how she described it. So we can validate the professional challenge. And here, let's see the time. Here, I wanted to show you the challenges regarding the first days. So in most of the cases, the principals just get to know the school in their first day at work. So for me, this is very, it was very surprising actually to see that. So here we can see an illustration of one type of a process. So at day one, for example, the principals are nominated. So let's imagine that you did this concurso. I can say public tender, or is it, how is it in English, David? Is it public tender? Or is it concurso?
Yeah, it's a in effect an entry exam. You know, it's a process by which people are qualified to serve as principals.
Okay, perfect. So I'm gonna say entry exam. So imagine you did this entry exam in 2000.
A point of information on the concurso. Is the concurso just you have to pass in order to be qualified for being selected, or is the concurso like if you get a very high grade on the concurso, you get the first choice? Is it what is the nature of the concurso?
The concurso is open for all the teachers that work in the municipality. You have two criteria. You have one that is, you have to have an undergraduate degree in pedagogy or a graduate degree in education, and you have to have 3 years of teaching experience. If you have that, you can do this entry exam. It's composed of a dissertation and very objective questions. And then they analyze all your titles. I don't know if I can say that. Like if you have bachelor degrees or graduate degrees, and then you have different punctuations according to that. And then you get classified according to that. The concurso was in 2015. And then there's a list, a classification list based on this exam and based on these titles. And since then, I don't know, maybe I should go back to this.
But that means that, so.
Have you seen this, Carnoy?
I see.
Since
So
2015, there were like 9 nominations for the same entry exam. So they are calling people that were that did this entry exam in 2015. They're still calling because it's very expensive to do new entry exams. So they use the same one and they keep calling.
You're on a, you get onto a ranked list.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
And as places open up, you
Yes.
get, I suppose if you're number 1 on the list, you get to choose which school you go to, right?
Exactly.
And the
Exactly.
further down the list, the fewer choices you have, right?
Exactly. Exactly like that.
But Lara, is it like that? Because I'm not certain that, you know, they have to choose number 1 on the list first, right? Because these are political appointments, not bureaucratic appointments.
No. I was just separating. I was saying that in most of the municipalities in Brazil, the selection is made through appointment. In São Paulo, it's a different system.
Okay.
It's the entry exam. The entry exam will determine the nomination.
Well,
It has nothing to do with political nomination or election. This is done in 96% of the municipalities. São Paulo is an exception.
Okay.
so this is like the teachers in São Paulo municipality done the same way, isn't it?
Most of the entry exams here in São Paulo are done like this. Like I was a public policy specialist, and I did the same process as this one.
So, but teachers are done the same way, right?
Yeah, I think so. I don't
Yeah, Leo Rosa, who I think is on this Zoom, he's a participant, did a study of this in terms of how where the teachers end up. And so it's likely, if this is done the same way, maybe Leo can talk later. I just want to know, if your description is correct, then the highest scoring principals with the best characteristics, so-called the best characteristics, will end up in the most desirable schools, unless they're very idealistic and want to go to some very difficult schools. Is that correct?
Yeah, it's exactly, in this sense, it's exactly the same.
Okay.
The process is exactly the same. So when we go back to the...
May I just add a point? But if
After you, Tasha, can
sorry.
I also? No. Go ahead.
It's about the principals. If in the first call, the list of schools may be not as good as in the second call, for example, could that happen? And then someone that is first in the list could get a school that is less desirable than another school just because it was not open by then.
Yeah.
Is that possible?
Since then,
And if I remember correctly, just to complement what Tasha just said, I mean, she has a great point, and the second list could be much worse than the first one, right? So the other thing is, if I'm not wrong, I feel the principals are gonna take these tests or contests, whatever, I don't know the translation of that, but they're gonna take that by regional, right? So they are gonna have like few options within the region, not necessarily they are gonna have like the entire list of schools available. I'm correct?
no, as far as I know, they can choose from all the regions. Because sometimes they went to a very different regional department that they didn't know anyone in the regional department.
All right. Okay. All right. Cool.
So maybe this is different from the teacher selection. I don't know. Because like what Tasha said here, so looking here at the first nomination in October 2016. So I don't know how many, I had to look to see how many principals were nominated in this first call, but maybe like 15 of them were nominated here. But maybe the schools had like lower student performance or were located in more distant areas than this third nomination here in August 2017. This is what you asked, right, Tasha?
Can the people, if I'm nominated as a principal and I'm on the list, let's say I'm number 1 on the list, and there's this call in October 2016. I took the test in 2015. Can I say, no, I don't like any of the schools and wait till the second call?
No,
You can't.
no. You either accept or not. You can say, I don't want to be a principal. I want to stay as a teacher. But you cannot.
Once you do that, you're done. You're done. Yes?
You're done.
You give up your place.
Yeah.
Okay.
to
So,
wait for
so
another.
Kasia is correct. Okay, thank you.
Okay. So here's just one illustration of what happens in a beginning principal's life. So you did the entry exam in 2015. And then like 4 years later, you then discovered that you were nominated as a principal because it appears in Diário Oficial. This is like the official newspaper from the government, the governmental official newspaper. So, and then you discover you were nominated as a principal. And then 7 days later, you get to know the schools where you can choose from. So the list, you have the access to the list of schools that you are going to be able to choose from. And then you have 5 days to look at these schools and gather all the information possible regarding these schools. What is for me, it was very surprising is that the Department of Education does not give any information at all about the schools. You don't know the modalities, you don't know the size, you don't know anything. So you have to look at all the information, the location, the size, everything in 5 days. So maybe you're lucky enough because you were nominated with 18 other principals. So you have to look at just 19 schools. But in some cases, the nomination was for like 800 principals. So you have to gather information regarding 800 schools.
So this comes back to the questions that we've been asking you. So all of the principals would congregate towards the best schools, or at least we're arguing that the principals would prefer the best schools. So they would try to look at the list and seek out. But suppose you're number 795 on the list. Do you have that information? Do you know where you rank on the list?
And actually, David, I'm just gonna answer the first part of your question. Okay. They said that the main reason to choose a school is not student performance, but its location.
Okay.
So they choose the schools that are near their house.
That makes sense.
Okay.
That's why
it's like, you know, in the United States, they ask people about their choices of where they take medical care, and the first choice is location, not quality of care.
Yeah, so it's the same. So they make a list of the schools that are closer. And sometimes they have the possibility to see the size. Sometimes they can go to the schools and take a look at the school and understand the context of the school. But if you are in a list with another 100 principals, it's impossible to do that. Gather the information that you can over the internet or talking with other principals, and they make the list based on the location. That's it. So on day 13, you have to choose the school we are going to work. And then 7 days later, you go through a medical exam. On day 30, you are officially nominated. And then on day 31, it's officially your first day at school.
So Lara, I'm sorry to nag you about this, but the process of choosing is still opaque, right? Because there will be some schools probably that are not chosen by any principal, right? You know, even if they don't choose on quality, even if they choose on location, there will be some neighborhoods, some parts of the city where no one wants to go. So how does that school choice process work?
For the schools that were not chosen?
Well, yeah, so suppose if you're number 1 on the list, you get your first choice, right? If you're number 795 on the list, you may choose 10 schools, none of which, and someone has chosen them before you. You know, so there are principals who will not get to choose the school they go to, and there will be schools that no one chooses. So how does the city then assign principals to those schools?
Sometimes, because sometimes you can call like 100 principals and just 80 of them show in the like day 13 to choose the school. So 20 schools that were on the list are not going to be chosen anyway.
Right.
And that's why it enters this figure of the principal substitute.
Oh,
Informal role. They can put an informal, someone like a teacher can go there as a principal substitute just for a period of time until there is another call for the school. Was I clear enough, or should I?
Lara?
Felipe.
Yeah, what do you mean by informal?
Who's talking to me? I don't know. I
Felipe
didn't.
Herky.
Felipe, so it happens like this. If there is no principal nominated by the Department of Education, they can choose among the teachers someone to stay in this role for some time, for a period of time. So that's why in this slide here, some of them acted as diretor escolar. See here, 10% of them had already worked as a principal, but without being nominated.
Sure. But it's not informal though. Like they are getting paid as principals. They're getting paid as they're like the Department of Education acknowledges them as principals, but temporary ones, not the ones that are tenured.
Yeah, perfect. Yeah, this is.
But Lara, so I keep coming back to this point. But suppose you are the worst school in São Paulo. You're in the poorest neighborhood with the poorest students, far from the bus line, impossible to get to. No principal chooses you. No one from the concurso chooses you. So you appoint a teacher from the school, as the temporary principal. That could turn out to be a permanent situation, right? Because maybe no principal will ever choose that school. They just look at the school and say, I would never go there. Yeah. 800 people say that. So then, so this informal or supposedly informal appointment of a temporary principal could end up being a permanent appointment, right?
Yeah, and in many schools, it is a permanent situation.
Okay, thank you.
There is something even worse. I didn't put that in the slide, but given the discussion here, I think it's interesting to say that. This concurso, so this, I'm gonna go back here. So these principals were nominated in these chamadas here, the 9 callings here. Mm-hmm. So let's suppose here you were called like in January 2019 to become a principal. And then you go to the school. It was not a school that you chose, but you're there, okay. And then on June 2019, another principal entered a school that is like near you, but okay. So everyone that entered the system as a principal in 2019, all these principals, all these 215 new principals will have to choose another school in the end of the year. It's called concurso de remoção. The first school that you choose is not the school that you're going to stay.
Okay.
So you have like an entrance school. This is the school that you chose when you were nominated a principal. So this is the process that I showed in the illustration here, like here. This is the process, like 30 days later, you start working in a school. Maybe you started in January, maybe you started in July, depending on when you were nominated all of them will have to go through the remoção in the end of the year. So all of them will have to choose again. So they are working in a school that they don't even know if they are going to stay in the school in the next year.
Mhm. Okay.
Some of them will have like 1 year, like this 1 year period of time to work on the school. Like 1 year, it's reasonable. But like maybe you have just like 4 months. You're not going to.
Clara, Martin, so do we have any idea how many schools are in the city, the municipal system? Do you have any idea? Several thousand, right? How many?
I would guess.
So if there,
I
So-
think
Well-
between 1,200 and 1,500.
Yes.
okay, so do we have any idea of these 1,200 to 1,500 schools, what the average life of, what the average period that a person has been a principal in that school?
No, I don't know that.
So current, if just, I mean, you don't have to interview principals to know that. You just go to the records of the city and, or the school system of the city, and know how long each principal has been at that school. I mean, in each school, how long the principal's been there, right?
Perfect.
So I think it's pretty useful information for as a background. I would say that you should get that information.
Yeah, the turnover rate among principals is very high. in the
Yeah,
United States.
So that's useful to know.
Yeah.
What is the turnover rate? I
So
mean,
this-
you
Table of Terms.
it's okay if they just go to another school and they're experienced principals, but you're saying that a very small percentage of the people you interviewed actually had previous experience as a principal, right?
No, the majority of them had previous
So
experience.
66% had, right?
6%.
Is that it? Is that the number?
Yeah.
Okay. So the question is, throughout the system, is this what goes on? Is there just a churning from school to school of principals? That actually wouldn't be so bad if it depends, because it may be that the principal leaves because they're terrible and people hate them and they just go to another school, or the principal leaves because they've done a great job and now they want to move to another school and reform that school. I mean, there are various reasons, right? So,
Some of them said that they didn't want to leave the school, but they know that they have to go through the remoção. So they are working without knowing if they are going to continue in the school or not.
oh, I see.
Know how they can do that, actually.
Clara, it's Ariane. I have a question about this point. Can you explain why they have to go for the remoção process? Because I didn't understand why.
It's a process from the Department of Education. It's a system. It works like that. It's always been like that. And it's like, it's a system. It's a process. Like, I asked the secretario, and he said, no, it's a process. It's always been like that. And it's
So
in
that's the answer? It's a process,
Lara-
it's always been like that? In other words,
Lara,
Oh,
excuse me. In the city of São Paulo, they do these changes. They don't want that principals stay in very good schools for a long time. So it's just a barrier to make them circulate among all the regions of the city and all kinds of schools in the city. So as the inequality in the city of São Paulo is huge, so the philosophy behind that is that the principals must know all the realities of the city.
Oh, Leo, and how many schools there are in São Paulo? Do you know that? I didn't know that.
I think there are 1,350 or something like that. But there are some schools that in which you have early child education, and basic education, and they separate as units, but they stay in the same building. So sometimes you also have 2 or 3 principals for the same building.
Okay. But I agree with what you said, Leo, but I cannot understand why they have to do that. For me, it's something that I cannot, like, nobody gave me an answer to that. Like, why do they have to change in their first year?
Yes, this is
Maybe you could stay there for 3 years, I don't know, and then go to the remoção. It's okay. But like, you didn't even complete 4 months, and then like,
yes, this is a negotiation from what I know and what I participated. This is a negotiation between the union and the municipality for many years ago, and they just don't want to discuss that, because discussing this issue will bring all other issues that the government and the union don't want to discuss. So it's a political problem.
Just one more clarifying question, Lara, but this remoção just applies to first-year principals or to all principals?
To all principals. That's exactly what Leo was explaining.
Yes, okay. Okay, so everybody moves.
Everybody moves. But after you get like permanent in a school, I think the remoção is only after 3 years.
Okay.
What I don't understand is why in the first year, like when you get appointed in the first year, you're in a very unstable situation. So after 4 months, you have to do the remoção, and then like 3 years later, and then 3 years later. And then...
Okay, good. We should let you go on.
Okay, no, perfect.
Well, if I were to invent a system that I would have to find, I'd have to look pretty hard to invent a worse system. I mean, think about it. If you really think about it, if you really wanted to have a terrible system of running schools, this probably would be pretty close to the worst one you could choose.
And what I don't understand is like when I asked them and they said like, it's not going to change, it's impossible to change, it's always been like this is the legislation, or so like they don't even have like good answers for that. Like, so I
Lara,
agree with you, Carnoy, so with Leo.
I think about this point, I would like to know, because since they know that they will be removed in 1 year, the first school that they chose doesn't matter. And so you would expect that more principals could choose in the first year and wait for 1 year to really know at least a better school, to have the chance to go for the better school. So do you know if the teachers think about this when they will choose, because since the first year doesn't matter?
I don't know, I actually don't know if they have this, because some of the cases they said, I know that there is the remoção, but I hope I will stay in this school. So I think that they choose hoping to stay if they liked the school. I think, but it's not something that I explored. It's an interesting point. But this illustration here, it's very, like if we stop to think about it, like in day 0, you were a teacher, you were at the classroom, and then in 30 days, you discovered you are now a principal. You had to choose the school with no information at all. You did the medical exam, and on day 31, you're at school, ready to begin and like do your job. So this is something that really like surprised me. Like the transition is very fast, like, and something that you did, like an entry exam that you did in 2015, maybe you don't even remember that you did this entry exam like 4 years ago. And the case studies were very revealing about this. This was a very delicate moment of the interviews. So one of the principals revealed that she had never worked with early childhood education before. She had only worked with primary and secondary education schools. And now she is a principal in an establishment that she doesn't know anything about, the work dynamics and the processes. She had never worked in an establishment like that. Another principal said that she's now in a school that is too big for her. Both of these principals didn't have any previous experience. This was one of the criteria for the selection. So one of the principals said that she's in a school that is enormous. It has like 2,500 students. It has 3 shifts. It has primary, secondary education. It has adult education. It's in a very vulnerable area. The students' outcomes are very low, so she's desperate, kind of, because she thinks that the system should look at beginning principles and that beginning principles should start in smaller schools. You should not start in a very complex school as the one that she is in right now. She says that it's too much for her. Some of them said that they didn't even know the situation of the school when they entered the system. So one of them said that the school was on strike during my first day. There were few teachers. They wanted, the community wanted some explanation. I was a new principal. I had to bring all of them to dialogue. She didn't know any of the teachers. She didn't know the team. She didn't know the community. And on her first day, the former principal was not there to do the transition. So she had to do this all by herself without any previous experience on management roles. So, and this is for me, it's a very sad finding. The first 15 days were the most stressful ones for them. They have to do a lot of bureaucratic activities. One of them is to list all the physical resources that are in the school. So all the chairs, all the lockers, all the balls, everything that is on the school. And if something goes wrong in this list, you can be suited. Suited, is that right? You can be, yeah? Okay, so you can be suited. And so they get very tense with this process, and they say sometimes they have to do this process all by themselves, and they hope they are doing it adequately, because otherwise they could be sued. After this period, they feel very lonely, abandoned, and isolated. All of them said that. One of the principals said that she's facing a panic syndrome. And one of them said that she's in a group with other principals, and many of them said that they regret having made this decision. And what is very sad is that they cannot undo this decision, because you cannot go back to being a teacher. Like, this is a career path, and now you are in a different position. One of them said, it's not difficult, but it's frenetic. We cannot rest, not even for a minute. There are many things to do. It is overwhelming. So this got me these findings got me very sad. Like, I was very sad to look at this situation. Most of them were facing a lot of mental issues, like important mental issues. And they told me about other cases, about other principals that were going through the same situation. 87% of them in the questionnaires described their first year as a hard or very hard experience. Regarding the main challenges, they listed personal relations and difficulty to become a leader, difficulties dealing with the teacher, especially absenteeism, or dealing with more experienced teachers, dealing with lack of staff and lack of technical expertise, the amount of bureaucratic activities to do. They have to deal with different systems in the schools, like the human resources system, the grading system, like there's a lot of different systems and they have to learn all the systems all by themselves. And they also have to deal with the school culture that is a culture of distrust and resistance. And this is the last slide regarding the results. So I asked them, who gave you the most important support during the first year? And the orange line, we can see the most important support. So the most important actors were the other directors. So when they were nominated, many of them created WhatsApp groups or Facebook groups. So this is very important for the socialization process for them, to have this network along with other beginning principals, and sometimes they do this with experienced principals also. So other principals are very important for them in this transition. And when I asked which is the actor that gave you the least support, is the Ministry of Education, as expected. There is no program designed for principals in Brazil. This is historically like that. It's not something that is from this period. And there were some initiatives, but they think the principals regard the Ministry of Education as not being important at all in this transition for them. I know that we are in a federative system, that São Paulo should be doing things as the Department of Education is responsible for that, but the Ministry of Education, as in other federative systems, should have also a guidance now or guidelines for that, and we don't have that in Brazil, unfortunately. So going to the last slides, we have like 3 last slides. So the first one is that this research confirmed what we saw in the literature review. So the Brazilian case confirms what we saw in other studies around the world. So there's nothing new in the Brazilian case. So all the problems are the same as I already said in the literature review in Anglo-Saxon countries, non-Anglo-Saxon countries, developed or non-developed countries. So the many demands faced by beginning principals, the feelings of abandonment and isolation, dealing with the school culture and the resistance to change, dealing with time management and the variety and volume of tasks, and dealing with a resistant team were seen as the most important problems. But it's important to understand that some governments and some public administrations are looking at this situation and trying to change it. So in Chile, for example, here in Latin America, they are starting to look at school leadership, and they are starting to put this in the agenda and designing programs for principals. When we look at successful programs around the world, 2 things are very important. One is practical experience is a key point in successful programs. And all of the principals, when I asked about how should be an ideal transition program or a training program, and they all said that they should have practical experience before becoming a principal. Another thing is that most of the training that was done by the union or by the regional departments focused only on technical abilities. So how to deal with the system, or how is the legislation, or how you should list all the resources and things like that. But there was nothing regarding personal or social abilities. And successful programs around the world are focusing on that, how to become a leader, how to motivate, how to deal with the resistance to change, how to motivate the staff and things like that. So these are 2 things that should be in this transition. And as you already know, but I'm just putting this here so we don't forget. There are much more complex issues, such as teacher absenteeism or teacher motivation, that are not going to be addressed just with training programs. But I'm looking just at this problem as at how we could ease this transition from the classroom to a management role. There are other things that a training program is not going to overcome, such as the remoção after some months, or the school choice done like this. So it's the system as a whole needs to have some changes that go beyond just the training program. And the next steps, now I'm going to compare the main findings with the Chilean experience to see what we learned in the Brazilian case that was different from the Chilean case. I'm also going to analyze the key characteristics of successful programs and understand how we could adapt them to the Brazilian case. Hopefully, this is going to be a report done by D3E. And I also want to present this in other arenas. This was done in the November of 2019, as I already said. There was an event at FGV where we could congregate all these actors. So CONSED was there, the State Department of Education from Tocantins, São Paulo, and Mato Grosso, the Municipal Department of Education, UNESCO, all the NGOs that are working with this theme, and Principals Union. They were all there. We had one day to discuss all these findings. Jose also came here and presented some of the successful cases in the world. But in Brazil, school leadership is not in the governmental agenda yet, is not in the systemic agenda, is not in the governmental agenda. So we are not looking at solutions yet because this is not even perceived as a problem. So we are just one step back. Like first we have to look at this as a problem. It is not in the agenda at all. And then we can start thinking about solutions or successful programs or things like this. This is what I think we should give this step back. So this should enter the agenda, and it's not yet in the agenda. So that's it, guys. Thank you so much.